Good afternoon. It's Friday, the 17th of November 2017, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, Mike Robinson. And we're delighted to be joined today by David Scott. And of course, David reporting from north of the border with Northern Exposure. Air in Scotland fresh, but what is it like elsewhere?
Well, if you listen to Sadiq Khan, London Mayor, of course, the air quality in London is appalling. We've mentioned this a few weeks ago. It doesn't meet EU standards, World Health Organization standards. As you can see on the map there, the centre of London is a nice deep red colour, Brian, because that is where the worst air pollution is. Sadiq Khan had said, if you remember, it's sickening to know that not a single area of London meets World Health Organization health standards, but even worse than that, nearly 95% of the capital is exceeding these guidelines by at least 50%. And this, of course, led to Sadiq Khan introducing the so-called T charge on top of the congestion charge, which means that anybody driving a diesel car has to pay an extra 12 quid or something, bringing the total cost to drive a diesel car into London to £24 a day. If you remember when we were talking about this a few weeks ago, I highlighted the fact that the Grenfell Tower disaster had caused Public Health England to start monitoring air quality at Grenfell, which is in the centre of London. They produce this report. They update it on a regular basis, environmental monitoring following the Grenfell Tower fire. And I had been showing that the monitoring results were showing that air quality was perfectly fine around Grenfell Tower and well below the expected standards. And so the question for me was, who's telling the truth and who's not telling the truth? Because somebody is clearly misleading the public, because Sadiq Khan on one hand saying that air quality in London absolutely appalling, Public Health England saying no problems, and certainly no elevated problems as a result of the Grenfell Tower disaster. So what was going on? Now I wrote to Public Health England and asked them for some kind of comment on this, and they didn't want to comment on it seems. Well, today the European Union has produced a new interactive map, which is a live map, so it shows you the situation with air quality right across Europe on a live basis, and they are calling this the European Air Quality Index. If you search for European Air Quality Index, you'll get this map coming up straight away. It's hourly data from 2,000 air quality monitoring stations across Europe, and as you can see, well, there are some pretty bad areas according to this. Poland clearly is the worst. A lot of coal burnt in Poland. Southern Spain, Barcelona, Paris, Lyon, looks like Toulouse possibly there as well. But if you...
So I was just going to interject. It's interesting, Italy's exceptionally clean because there's no data.
It seems like there's no data in Italy at the moment.
No, excellent.
But if we zoom in to the UK and have a look at London, well, strangely enough, air quality is either good or fair. So I'm now confused, absolutely confused, Brian, as to what's going on here. We've got Public Health England saying that as a result of their monitoring following Grenfell Tower, that there's no problem with air quality in London. We've got the European Union now saying that there's no problem with air quality in London. The only person that seems to be fibbing about this is Sadiq Khan. Of course, he has a political agenda because being one of the new Metro mayors, he wants to push forward with the climate change changes that are resulting from the climate accords. And of course, he wants to demonize diesel engines and diesel fuel at this point in time.
Well, and make a bit of money from doing that as well. Pull the money out of the motorists at the same time. But the moment I saw the World Health Organization mentioned, I think we get a clue, because this isn't really about air quality. This is about total and utter control of city-states, mayor system. I think this is part of a globalist agenda, and he's a few steps too far in advance because they haven't fiddled the rest of the air quality figures yet.
Let's bring David in at this point. Welcome to the programme, David. What are your thoughts?
It's remarkable how much the air quality in this country has improved. I was researching this on for another reason, and pollutants associated with heavy industry, things like sulfur dioxide, have gone down by 85-90% since the 1970s. So generally speaking, the air quality is much better. Now, there are local issues. There's nitrogen dioxide from car engines, there's particulates from diesels. There are local issues, but generally speaking, the air quality has improved out of all recognition in the last generation.
So no real reason to demonise diesel engines the way that they are being?
Well, after they introduced them, because when they were introduced, it was partly for reasons that they were better for nitrous oxides. And let's not worry about the particulate matter and everything we find, and they're less polluting. That's what I was told when I was at university in the 80s, studying, amongst other things, traffic and transportation.
Yeah, well, yes, indeed. Well, let's move on to another completely different subject. But
More good news, though. Sorry, I had to say that, Mike.
Well, indeed, because this is from the Scotsman, David, sorry. And the headline is, Legal Person Bid to Let Ben Nevis Fight for Its Rights. And basically what this seems to be, David, is a drive to give a mountain a legal personality.
It is. Now, when I had to come clean with the viewers here, when I first described this article to Mike, Mike thought I was winding him up. Mike thought I was making this up, but no, it's absolutely true. Let me quote Mr. Robertson here, the lawyer responsible. Quote, "The basic idea is to get the mountain's viewpoint up front in the decision making." So there you go.
Well, we've got to put this into a little bit of perspective and perhaps give a clue as to what's going on here. This has been an argument that's been going on, this issue of legal personality and the straw man and what the implications are for individuals about having a legal personality. And a number of weeks ago, when the Rohingya crisis was really kicking off, the head of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, made a statement in the UN. We covered it at the time. This is NDTV's coverage of it. He made a statement saying that it was time to give the Rohingya people legal personality, legal status, so that they could get access to things like healthcare, education, and so on. So there's a contract, an implied contract in this. If you've got citizenship, if you've got a legal personality, you get access to certain rights that otherwise you wouldn't have access to. And of course, those rights are being extended just to mountains here, David, but to robots as well, because Saudi Arabia granted citizenship, therefore legal personality, to a robot for the first time. We mentioned that a few weeks ago. And it seems to me that there's two issues here. The first is the fact that rights are being given to things which are not human. So this extends the human rights model to items which are not human. And what it also does is deny the idea of unalienable rights. Rights which are presumed and rights which are there from the day you're born, whether you have citizenship as a human being or not. So there's two pretty interesting aspects to this, which if they aren't discussed and aren't understood, could result in a pretty dangerous situation arising.
Yes, it's very dangerous. It's very confusing. The whole issue is designed to confuse. So it's very clear from the Ben Nevis article that you have a personality, you have a person, you are not a person, legally speaking, because the mountain is too. And it seems that this was introduced in order to help people interact with the state, but as the state has grown ever more powerful and that interaction has become ever more one-sided, more and more problems have arisen. Now, many people have tried to find solutions to this along the common law route, but those are difficult. It's difficult to see exactly what the correct situation and the correct understanding of these matters actually is.
The question in the chat box, is Ben Nevis going to get a vote?
Well, it should do. And I'm just loving the whole having a viewpoint. It also shows on another level that there is no limit to the stupidity. that you can get from the legal profession.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about the legal profession, and particularly in Scotland. Now, this, at first glance, seems to be a story about football in Scotland. Ex-Rangers administrator David Whitehouse sues over arrest. But really the key point is here, David, is whether he's actually has the right to sue over his arrest.
Yes, he claims that he was arrested unlawfully. He was unlawfully detained. There was no evidential basis for the action taken against him, and he wishes to sue the embattled head of Police Scotland and the Lord Advocate, Mr. Wolfe. And it transpires that one of the defences put up by the Crown here is that the Lord Advocate is exempt from civil action from people who were the subject of legal investigation. So no matter how corrupt or partial the interaction with the Crown Office may have been, no matter what the motivation for any particular action, the Lord Advocate is exempt, or so say the Crown. So that's another example of the very unbalanced position in Scotland, with the Lord Advocate holding huge amounts of power and special privilege compared to the ordinary people. And this, of course, was shown only too starkly by Robert Greene's interaction with former Lord Advocate Dame Elise Angelini.
But this is very strange, David, because according to this headline here, law firms who targeted residents over property repair scandal amongst list of lawyers paid £15 million public cash. But this is to do with former Lord Advocate Elise Angelini. But she was using public money in civil cases, was she not?
She was using public money. She was using taxpayers' money in civil cases, because it depends in the direction, because that was a civil case initiated by Dame Elise Angelini against Robert Greene. So it appears that in one hand, they're able to become involved in civil cases where they choose to, and on the other hand, where it doesn't suit them, then the law is different.
Right. Okay. Well, it goes it goes on because of course the Crown Office apparently like to hide cases if they're embarrassing or too difficult, or what's going on here?
Just before we leave the Dame Elise Angelini, it's just worth noting on the Freedom of Information request that Dame Elise Angelini is resisting, or Edinburgh Council are resisting releasing information on how much Dame Elise Angelini has been paid by the council in recent years for her wisdom and legal services. We hope to have an answer on that. The word on the street is it's quite a large number.
Okay. But what kinds of cases are the Crown Office covering up then?
This is an excellent article in the Record, and it goes through a whole series of cases now. This is the bin lorry crash in Glasgow. There's murders in here. There's the death in custody of Shaker Bale. All of these things go into the Crown Office for investigation and stay there for years. Years and years, and on it goes, and there's no resolution. Things don't come to a head. The Heather Capital, a case we've discussed several times in the past, is another example. There are 4 people who have been considered for prosecution under the Heather Capital scandal by the Crown Office, and they're being considered, and they're still being considered, and there's no decision, there's no way forward, and on it goes. And it's difficult. They do claim that lack of resources is one of the reasons, and that their £113 million budget isn't sufficient for those gallant men and women to run the Crown Office. But it seems quite a lot of money to me, and it seems that we're falling down in areas that are unrelated to funding.
Yes, and now you just mentioned the Freedom of Information Act, but the BBC here is reporting that there's going to be an investigation into the Scottish Freedom of Information system.
It's failing more and more. There is increasing tendencies amongst the Scottish government to conduct business in secret. A lot of business has been conducted without minutes being taken, without any records being taken. And where records do exist, journalists, MSPs, ordinary citizens are finding huge difficulty in actually getting the information out of the system via the Freedom of Information Act. it's becoming ever harder to make the system work, and there's ever more tricks being played on people to avoid them finding out what their government is really doing in their name.
I think we should just remind ourselves that, of course, Tony Blair said publicly that he regretted bringing in freedom of information. And I think that was a very telling comment because, of course, what he unwittingly did is enabled people to actually put the government under scrutiny. And we've also had some discussion by MPs recently saying, well, we need some sort of tightening up. It may even have been Lord Leveson involved with that, some tightening up of freedom of information, because we don't want it too free, you understand.
And David, of course, this doesn't just apply to Scotland, because you're still struggling to get certain information about Grenfell Tower.
Yes, although I did get a very nice tweet from the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea, who said publicly on Twitter, send us a direct message and we'll do our very best to help. So that's encouraging.
Sorry, you've got to use Twitter now to get access to freedom of information, is that right?
Yes, Mr. Yu, the information officer in the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea, has been less than helpful. He won't answer phone calls, he won't answer emails, he won't answer anything. But their Twitter team are on the case.
Spectacular.
Okay, well, we've got another one here. This is the Scotsman, and it's got Mr. MacDonald. Childcare Minister resigns over his past behaviour, but we can change that pretty quickly because former SNP Minister Mark MacDonald seeks help over inappropriate behaviour. Now, you've pointed out that this man has got a lot of responsibilities, or did have: adoption and fostering, childcare implementation, children's hearing, child protection, children's rights, children's services, early years, looked after children, protection of vulnerable groups, social service workforce, but he's done something inappropriate. The Sun had picked up here, Sleaze row. Apparently he's been suspended from the SNP now as he faces a second complaint of inappropriate behaviour, but Nicola Sturgeon had supported him. This man seems to be heavily...
Well, he's certainly being backed up and helped here, but you notice that, just before we get David to comment, you notice that he has taken the same approach as Weinstein and some other big names, where you admit what you've done and you immediately put yourself into some kind of rehabilitation and seek help. Yeah. And then you presume that you won't be prosecuted for it afterwards. It seems like a good deal, Brian.
Well, I think they're following a template at the moment. I'm going to stick with my feeling on what's going on, that as very serious offences, of course not related to Mr. MacDonald, but serious offences over the abuse of children are coming to the surface, and I think we've got a little bit over that a little bit later in the news. Everybody else is putting out a smokescreen for their misdemeanours. Template is my opinion. David, I don't know what you feel.
Does it work with other crimes? I mean, if a burglar says, "Look, I'm very, very sorry about my behaviour. I'm going to seek counselling," does that mean that we don't have to worry that he's nicked your stuff? Or is it only leading personalities and politicians that can play that card? Now, you said earlier that that he admits what he's done. Well, has he? I'm not so sure that he has, because this was denied vehemently up until yesterday. The Sun put this article online. It was denied by the SNP so strongly that the Sun pulled the article from their online edition. But there had been sufficient media interest created that later that afternoon the SNP announced that he'd been suspended from the parliamentary party and from the SNP as a whole. So there's clearly more information about to come out. I think there's going to be some revelations coming out at the weekend. Now, with all this man's responsibility for children, and it's quite clear from this that we're not talking anymore about a jokey text that was ill-judged, which is the official explanation as to why he resigned, which carries no more weight than talk of touching a journalist's knee as reason to lose a defence secretary. So something's going to come out, but this is a man responsible for children, responsible for named person, responsible for all the parts where the state is stepping in and looking after children. And what has he been doing? And the young ladies he's been communicating with? Are any of those under 18? Do any of those have named person? These are all questions that we'll need to get answers to. And of course, the SNP government are saying absolutely nothing at the moment. But it seems unlikely that they will be able to keep a lid on this for much longer.
Yeah, and David, some people are sufficiently fired up over this case to write to the press, and you've got a letter here from a lady, One Rule for Him. I'll read it out briefly. Former Minister for Childcare and Early Years, Mark MacDonald, has asked for privacy while he deals with whatever problems he has that render him unfit for office in the Scottish Government. Your report, 13th November. Oh, how the parents of Scotland would like to be afforded the same privacy to deal with their personal matters. Will Mr MacDonald's indiscretions appear on his children's chronologies, like the rest of us, and be discussed and shared amongst myriad practitioners, assessing its impact on their well-being and whether it constitutes a concern that requires the state to intervene? That's a pretty penetrating letter, ripping the top off, of course, named person scheme.
Yes, and full disclosure, that was for my wife. I think I should probably mention that, but I think extremely well judged and asked the right question. And of course, there are many more questions that this gentleman's going to have to answer. And even the BBC doorstepped him as he was trying to sneak into his constituency office and asked him a few questions. And he said that basically he wanted a chance to go on, and it was up to his constituents to decide whether he had a job anymore, and they could make that decision in 2020. So there you go. In
2020. Okay, well, we've mentioned named persons. Let's bring this in. You've got named persons fringe here, and I can call these back on screen for you. You've also got postcards, which are really outstanding, I think, which are going out. Postcards from the fringe. This one starts, I'm pregnant with my fourth child, but after a horrendous experience with a bullying health visitor whose unprofessional conduct was a complete disgrace, I have no intention of letting one of these snoopers into my home. We've got another one here which starts off, our family have successfully opted out of the named person scheme. And what's the final one here? As a teenager, I feel completely let down. I no longer feel I can confide in any of my teachers because I worry that all my personal information is being stored and shared against my will. These are very powerful, David. What's happening here with named person and the postcards?
Well, having been excluded from the official proceedings looking at named person, some people who've been involved in the Noted Named Person campaign decided to run their own parallel fringe event. So they put out a call for information, for opinions, for stories, for testimony to the people of Scotland. And they got in many of these. There was 93 of these cards went into to the Parliament. So these are parents and children of Scotland expressing their view and very often their experience of the named person scheme as it's been in action over the last few years. So this was an event that happened in Edinburgh on Wednesday last week, and there was further testimony given during an afternoon event, which was video recorded, and that video will be up quite shortly, so people can see what's said. And then the people who organised this went down to the Parliament and handed this into James Donnan, the convener of the committee that's looking at named person. And so he assured them that he would read all of these accounts and take it all into consideration. Now, two of those cards, which you had up on the screen there, finishes with, one says, I want to move out of Scotland when I leave school and finish university. And another one says, if I could leave Scotland, I would. The culture of state snooping is modelled on the East German Stasi. So this is how people are viewing it. They're extremely unhappy. The experiences, one of the experiences, the false information which was being held by practitioners, by the professionals about one family, had to be challenged by getting all the subject access requests failed to generate the information. The family had to go to the court and get a court order. And because they then had to go and get bailiffs to go to the council office to get the information. And because the bailiffs turned up without notice, they got this information completely unredacted. And there was information which is full of lies, full of stories made up about the family. And some of them were headed, don't tell mum, don't share with mum. So this is information being kept from the parents. It's extremely sinister. More and more is coming out. And it was a very good event to bring this to light. So it now just remains to be seen whether the committee of the Scottish Parliament will actually react appropriately to all of this information that they've received.
Can't really expect that, I suppose.
No, but incredibly serious stuff. We need to keep reporting this, and of course parents need to understand that at the moment there is a massive attempt to grab control of children. This is very senior stuff. Well, it's all backed up, of course, by, we could say, failure in the court or corruption in our court system. And I'm going to put out a plea today. This is for a lady who we believe is going to be evicted for the second time from her house. It's a Plymouth location in Peveril, 23rd of November. It could happen at any time during the day, as these things do, but the background to this case is truly horrific. A lady is living in her home. A partner who she hasn't seen for 17 years makes a claim on the house, even though there is no evidence that the house, that individual has a right to make that claim. But it's taken into the court, and despite being thrown out of the court, despite the fact that documents have found to be misleading, perjury, conspiracy has taken place, and indeed at the moment there's a police crime number for the case. There's to be another attempt to evict this lady from her house. So if you remember the plight of Tom Crawford in Nottingham that we covered in great detail, this is another case. We know there are many of these cases taking place across UK on a daily, weekly basis. This one is local to us, and I also have to say that the lady concerned and former partner were very, very big supporters of the UK column. So if anybody is in the Plymouth area coming Thursday and can assist, and of course, as we always say, this is about a presence, it's about being reasonable, polite with whomever turns up, but it's showing that the public are not prepared to sit back and allow these things to happen. Okay,
a little bit of defence news. There's young Gavin on screen at the moment, Gavin Williamson, our new Defence Secretary, and he is on the deck of the new Queen Elizabeth aircraft carrier. Because apparently the Queen, in a couple of weeks' time, 3 weeks' time, is going to commission the HMS Queen Elizabeth. So that's good stuff. He said, in a world of intensifying global threats, this magnificent ship will be a leading force, fighting to protect the values of the UK and our allies. It's an honour to visit her at sea and to meet such a passionate crew. I'm sure Her Majesty will be similarly impressed at next month's historic ceremony for the nation's new flagship, which proudly bears her name. Unfortunately, well, I did ask earlier, Brian, if it's slightly narcissistic for the Queen to name the ship after herself, but that's one question. But the other question is, do we actually have any protection for this ship? And perhaps having all these dignitaries on this ship at one time is a dangerous situation for them, I mean.
Well, possibly. What can I say? Yesterday we had the UKIP leaders speaking out about the state of Britain's military, and of course we now know the truth is we don't have a single Royal Navy ship that's fully operational. We've got major spares problem, mannings problem, engineering problems, spare parts are being obtained by pulling them out from other ships. Chaotic, very, very dangerous situation, and on Monday three retired and very senior military officers said this isn't just a problem for the Royal Navy, it's across all three services, to which we say high treason. I don't think there's been any mainstream reports about that UKIP speech by the UKIP leader, which we covered yesterday. I'll check after the news, but it seems that nobody wants to talk about the perilous state of Britain's defence. And of course, if Queen Elizabeth is at sea, we still have no aircraft. F-35 still got problems, including allowing the pilots to breathe. But apparently this is all just coincidental. Well, the Royal Navy's also been in the spotlight over the Charles Howson case. This is a report from Cornwall Live. Here's the headline: Charles Howson trial. Alleged victim says revolting sexual assault was kept quiet to avoid scandal. I find this particularly interesting because here we've got a finger being pointed firmly at the Royal Navy, saying you were told what happened, but you did nothing. The article goes on to say that QC Daniel Janner, who's been defending Howson, suggested that the man in the cross-examination wasn't telling the truth. You did not actually care what happened in the investigation. Either it had not happened or it was so trivial that you were not fussed. That's what he said to the witness. The man replied, "It happened, it was disgusting, it was a revolting incident. If I'd done anything to touch an officer, I'd have been hung out to dry. It's been kept quiet for the Navy's sake." Mr. Janner suggested there was no groping at all, and the witness replied, "That is a lie." Now, the point I'm going to continue to make is, of course, whether or not something took place, it's the location that it took place. If somebody is assaulted at work, they can always leave the office or they can always leave the job. They can get away. But in a warship, there is nowhere to go, there's nowhere to hide, there's nowhere to run. So is this groping? Well, we don't exactly know, but of course the effect of this is magnified hugely by the location. So I think this case is extremely interesting, not only as what is alleged to have taken place, but the fact that the Navy is now firmly in the spotlight as having covered up.
The question in the chat box is Daniel who?
Janner.
Janner?
I believe this gentleman is son of Janner.
Greville Janner?
Grenville Janner, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Okay, well, sticking with child abuse, we've got a Met police officer, PC, admittedly, but nonetheless, he was working for the, his duty was with the Parliamentary and Diplomatic Protection Unit, so he was protecting MPs, and he has been, he has admitted in court, he's pled guilty to possessing 1,700 indecent images of children. This is Adam Cox, who's 37. He was suspended from duty in August last year, and as I say, he has been he's pled guilty and is now expecting a lengthy prison sentence. But here again, we have somebody operating within the protecting the establishment in this case. You know, you just showed a picture of Mr. Howson standing beside the royal family again. The media using those pictures quite a lot, it seems, and here we have a police officer who's working with to protect parliamentary MPs and others. There seems to be a picture building of allegations or evidence of people within this
it's an establishment circle. Yes. That's it. It's to do with people at high level of the establishment, but also the political establishment. Interesting that this Met police officer pleads guilty to having the indecent images, but when a Met police officer, John Wedger, stands up and accuses the Met police of covering up the abuse of children, he's hounded out of the police force, and Amber Rudd, Theresa May refused to investigate what that man had to say. Now, let's bring in this because there's a connection here, really, because here's the Mail headline: the Duke of Windsor's will to be unsealed at last, but only so the Crown's writers can get their facts straight. Now, the Crown they're talking about is a programme about the life of the Duke of Windsor. I think we can bring it in here. Of course, it's all very glossy, lots of hype, but this has required records from the National Archives to be opened in order that information can be verified. And the man who's done this is Sir James Mumby, President of the Family Law Division, and he noted that the Duke of Windsor died on May the 28th, 1972, and made an order allowing the seals on the envelope to be broken. So Mumby said a copy could be made and delivered to Mr. Irvine. Now, this is very, very interesting stuff. The article itself said the judges in Sir James's position, i.e. with the family courts, have responsibilities for the sealing and unsealing of royal wills. So the bulk of the money circulating in rural circles comes, of course, from the public, but the wills can be sealed, and then it's the family law division that can decide whether they're going to be unsealed. Now, the document on this is available. Encourage people to read it because it is very mysterious stuff. No proper proceeding in court, but a decision is made. We're not quite sure why and what this is about, but let's remind ourselves that this is the National Archives, the same National Archives that have sealed the records of children's homes for between 50 and 80 years, even where abuse has taken place. So it now seems that the family division can decide whether those children's records are going to be released or not, even when there's abuse taking place. And at the moment, we know that children's homes records across the country are shut for between 50 and 80 years. So if any deep researchers out there would like to have a look at that court document and consider parallels with the closure of child abuse records, in as much as the children's homes themselves you can't get the record for, can you get in touch with us, please?
Right, let's move on to the civil service, because the stage is set, apparently, according to the civil service, for a brilliant civil service event at the Queen Elizabeth Centre in London, which will be attended by civil servants from across the country. This is hashtag a brilliant civil service. This is the new tagline for the civil service. Here is their civil service vision 2015 and 2020. And what's this really about, Brian? It's about training, it's about leadership, it's about behavioural change, and this is they are reframing civil servants between now and 2020. If we look at the previous picture, it's a nice colour of purple there that they've got in those lights.
Well, purple, we've said, is the colour of kings, but this almost looks like gas burners to me. This looks like fire, and I personally think there's something deeply sinister going on here, because public servants are now being reframed to believe that they are future leaders.
Yes. Okay. Well, look. Let's move on to the Middle East. Jim is dead. Apparently, this is the Joint Investigative Mechanism, which for chemical weapons in Syria. There was another attempt to get this project extended in the United Nations yesterday. Well, actually, first of all, what happened was that the Russians put in what's the word? A UN resolution. They put in a resolution to try and get a proper investigation into what happened in Syria with regard to chemical weapons. That was voted out, so there was no opportunity for them to proceed with that. But they then used their veto to prevent a continuation of the Joint Investigative Mechanism, which is being run jointly by the UN and the Organization for Prohibition of Chemical Weapons. So the Russians used their veto for the 10th time, much to the disappointment. And, well, Boris here said, it is appalling that the UN Joint Investigative Mechanism has been closed down. We continue to need expert, impartial and independent investigations into allegations of chemical attacks in Syria. That must make us all feel very nice. Let's have a look and see what the, this is the UK mission to the UN. They said, now UN vote on Russia's resolution, full of twisted facts and half-truths, is what they said about Russia's attempted resolution. So we support the people of Syria. They say that's why we can't support this resolution. It gets better, because after the Russians were defeated and then the Russians vetoed the US and UK's version of it, the UK mission of the UN said 10 resolutions in Syria, 10 Russian vetoes. The recurring theme: when the people of Syria look to UNSC for help or hope, Russia raises their hand and veto. I mean,
it's an inversion.
This is absolute inversion. Now, it gets better, because just prior to coming on the programme, I was sent over a response from the Foreign and Commonwealth Office to a Freedom of Information Act request on the chemical weapons attack, the alleged chemical weapons attack on Khan Shaykhun in Syria, which took place on the 4th of April. And the question was asked, On the 12th of April, UK Ambassador to the United Nations, Mr. Matthew Rycroft, told the UN Security Council that UK government scientists from Porton Down facility had concluded that sarin nerve gas, or a sarin-like substance, was used in the attack on Khan Shaykhun. Could you provide me with a copy of the scientific report or reports used by the British government to come to the conclusion that sarin or sarin-type substance was used in the above-mentioned attack? So that was the question that was asked of the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, and the answer was, I'm writing to advise you that I can neither confirm nor deny the information you requested is held by the Foreign and Commonwealth Office.
So the British government is ultimately accusing Assad and even the Russians have been complicit of a chemical attack. It's based on evidence, but when you ask them for the evidence, they don't even know whether they've got.
Oh no,
evidence.
they know,
Oh, right.
know, but they won't confirm or deny that they have it. They say that in relation to your request, Section 1(a) of the FOI Act requires authorities to say whether information is held. However, the exemptions in the Act allow exceptions to the duty to confirm whether information is held when giving that confirmation would in itself disclose exempt information.
Right.
Okay, is that clear?
What does David make of that?
Yes, David, because that is a very yes minister type response, isn't it?
It is. So what does it mean? Does it mean that there's no scientific evidence? Does it mean they've got it from a secret source? Has a spy type source told them? Yes, it was all the Syrian government. I mean, what does that mean? It means it could mean anything. But it certainly doesn't back up their position that they have some sort of scientific evidence. If they have some sort of scientific evidence, why would it be secret?
This is a very good question. We start to get into some quite interesting developments here. Briefly, David, first of all, the Turkish, and this is Erdogan, has basically said that the US have been funding ISIS. This is the first time I've seen any major political figure from around the world saying such a thing. He has accused Washington of sponsoring ISIS. He said the US said they were fighting Daesh, but what did they do instead? They gave Daesh a load of dollars. We do not want to enter into an allied relationship with them on the Kurdish issue. And when we offered to work with them together, they promised that not a single member of the Kurdish party would remain there, and so he's feeling that the US have reneged on a deal that he had, and therefore he's saying this. So the question then is he telling the truth, or is he only saying it to embarrass people that he feels has reneged on a deal? Well, I think we would think that he's probably telling the truth in this case. We seem to have plenty of evidence for that. But also in the Middle East, David, very interesting, the Israeli chief of staff interviewed by a Saudi newspaper, according to BICOM here. They say an interview with the head of the Israeli Defense Forces was published yesterday in the privately owned Saudi newspaper Alaf. For the first time, an IDF official has spoken to media in Saudi Arabia. Well, what do you make of the apparent closer and closer ties between Israel and Saudi Arabia? I think we've got to bring into this the stuff that we were discussing on the news program on Monday with Patrick Henningsen, that actually Hezbollah is the target here, and Iran as well. But what do you think about this pretty significant change in Israeli policy, perhaps?
Just before I get on to that, is the Turkish president telling the truth? Well, the US State Department would agree with him. One of the WikiLeaks emails that came out was a memo from the US State Department which says, quote, "We need to use our diplomatic and more traditional intelligence assets to bring pressure on the governments of Qatar and Saudi Arabia, which are providing clandestine financial and logistic support to ISIS and other radical groups in the region." So yeah, this is it's the US, it's Saudi that's generating it all, says the United States State Department. In terms of the links between Saudi Arabia and Israel, this would seem very unlikely on the surface, because here you have a Wahhabist regime meant to be extreme Muslim, meant to want to have Islamic domination. I think that's what we're told. But no, we've got very close links. Increased tension between Iran and Saudi Arabia has fueled speculation that shared interests may push Saudi Arabia and Israel to work together against what they see as a common Iranian threat. And this has been playing quite a lot in the Israeli press. Haaretz had an opinion piece asking if Saudi Arabia was pushing Israel into a war with Hezbollah and Iran, and whether the close alliance they have with Saudi Arabia is in fact going to cause them to be in a war before they're ready. There seems to be an acceptance that there will be another Lebanon war, but it's all about timing, it would seem. So yes, a very clear alliance, and it's Saudi and Israel and America versus Iran and Russia, I suppose, would be a supporter, and Syria and Lebanon. And these are the way that's at the moment the division lines are shaping up.
Yeah.
Okay, David, thank you for that. We're very tight on time, but I'm just going to touch on this one. We're going to do more on this particular subject next week. It's about a cat. Have a look at this. Text came into UK column. It said, massive move by the Royal College of Veterinary Surgeons. They've banned all alternative treatments. This potentially means owners and providers can be jailed if they use these treatments. I believe this will be another erosion of our rights. So that came in on the 10th of November. What have we got today? Well, we got a Telegraph story about an owner being banned from having pets because she tried to heal the cat's wounds with honey. So this is the story. Denise Smith, 58, had applied Manuka honey to her cat Blackie's leg, believing it had healing properties which would help him. The cat did have a pretty significant wound. It was found to be suffering with a large and cancerous wound on her leg, which had gone so deep it had gone down into her tendon. What was the result of this? The lady was disqualified from keeping animals for 12 months and ordered to pay £615 in fines during the hearing on Wednesday. But we should also note that the RSPCA has been encouraged people to use Manuka honey on their Halifax and Huddersfield branch website. So that's all pretty interesting stuff. If you follow it through, it does indeed lead to the Royal College of Veterinary Surgeons seeming to come out with an attack on complementary medicines. This is one of the key men behind it. I beg your pardon. You can freeze the screen to actually read some of this, but he says homeopathy exists without a recognised body of evidence for its use. Furthermore, it's not based on sound scientific principles. And he goes on. He goes on here to say it's fair to say that debates on either side of this issue have been passionate, but we believe that we've got to have sound scientific foundations. So how did that treatment go? Well, the lady was trying to treat the cat, and the cat had its leg bandaged, so it wasn't that the cat was being abused or neglected in that way. Our RSPCA come in, they take the cat, they give it to the surgeons cut off the cat's leg, and the cat then later dies of the very same cancer that the lady was trying to treat in the first place. I'll do more on this because when you follow it through, there's something very, very strange happening in the decision-making process of the Royal RVCS. What is it? The Royal College of Veterinary Surgeons. Have a look at those images frozen on screen so that you can actually read the text there. David, we're at the end for our time. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you to all our viewers and listeners. And I will say that if you like what we're doing and you're a regular listener, then please subscribe and or donate, because we can only do what we do. We can only expand what we do with your continuing financial support. Thank you very much for joining us. Bye-bye.
Bye.